I just wanted to underscore that. Am I on? Is it on? Dead. Okay. No, I'll just talk about. Thank you. I think that's a good framing point. So different companies have different hurdles to get over, and they need different amounts of money and different type of patient investors. Crowdfunding, as we expect the laws to allow equity, aren't defined what the costs will be for a company to use crowdfunding, but we expect it to allow you to go out to people that you wouldn't ordinarily be allowed to sell an interest in your company to. But are those people sophisticated investors? Are they patient investors? Do they have any of the values to add that Carol mentioned, and sophistication in helping the company get to the next level? Can they make introductions for the next third or fourth round of funding if there is need? If a company needs to go into those channels, and if it's in an area where those sophisticated channels of investing funding are in place, crowdfunding will not be the proper path to start with, because it makes an unattractive company for professional and sophisticated investors to then do the next round. That's pretty much what I think any person in this industry would say.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think what may happen is that there's one thing is that I'm always reluctant to predict what investors will do, because you can predict what a rational investor would do, but investors are no more rational than other people. And you know, pardon the, you know, many of my friends in the VC community, you know, many have gotten all excited about the idea and haven't looked at the details. So, you know, there could be a scenario where it just, I mean, if you look at the kind of the herd mentality in the financial markets, back to the tulip craze, to the dot-com boom, I mean, the wisdom of crowds hasn't operated real well in the financial markets. So, so there could be something that takes off, but then what I believe is going to happen is that by doing crowdfunding, you've created all these extra hurdles. And what will happen is that there could be a sea of companies, and professional investors will wait around for the one that really pokes through to being such a success that it makes it worth their while to clean up the mess to do a professional investment. So, you know, so it's going to add extra hurdles to it.
And then by mess, you were talking about having hundreds of investors that are small investors.
Yeah, you know, you know, I can imagine either, you know, doing something where they're siloed off in some sort of non-voting stock, and or something of that sort. But, you know, and I also hear that one of my big fears with the crowdfunding thing is that there will be a blow-up of abuses of some sort of fraud that's then going to come back and generate new regulations that will come back and impact the vibrant angel community and have fallout and unintended consequences of additional restrictions. And that's my huge concern of what's going on with it.
Actually, I think the one that nobody's talking about that is really going to be the most serious is the litigation. And as all of my fellow panelists have talked about, the devil is in the detail, but in the investment world, in Silicon Valley specifically, we're very hesitant to start suing each other because we know and work with each other, and it's a small community. But once you get into stranger money and stranger co-investors, the likelihood of legal suits just goes up astronomically. And in every community, there are litigators that are looking for something to keep their practice going. And I think crowdsourcing is going to become a wonderful, very lucrative. Yeah, it'll become huge.
Now, if the crowd investors are only putting in $500 or $1,000, will they still sue if they feel wrong? Is a class action a possibility?
You're assuming that there's somebody that's going to come along and say, no, you can't sue. And that's not the way the American litigation process is. I can sue anytime I want, and I can ask for damages or claims for any amount that I want. I mean, I get it.
But would a $1,000 investor who feels harmed spend more money to sue?
So what is more likely to happen, and there is some limits in the act it's limited to the amount of the investment, but where there'll be a cottage industry is, as you say, you can do up to, say, $1 million of investment. So it's not the $1,000 investor that's going to go sue. It's, as Carol's referring to, it's the guy on late night TV that says, hey, I want to, did your company go under? Everybody call me and we'll put together a lawsuit here. And I'll represent everybody. And so that's the more likely direction that it will go.
We were chatting a little bit before we started the panel here, and we said regulation tends to function like a pendulum. It swings from one extreme to the other extreme, and a couple of years back, later, it goes back to where it came from. And so we were wondering a little bit whether, in an effort to stimulate foundation of new companies and ultimately job creation, whether maybe we've come up with a regulation which makes it a little too easy, which also means that some people will lose money, and ultimately that could create a backlash, whether it's in the media or whether this is just a sentiment that potential investors have or develop against that kind of financing. And a silly way to describe it is, traditionally we've always said, well, you start a company and you maybe raise some friends and family. Well, actually, quite often we say it's the 3 Fs, the third F being the fools. And we were wondering whether the crowdfunding model actually allows to perfect the third part of that, the fool's part of it. And my concern really is that there will be a little bit of a pushback in a couple of years, and then the pendulum of regulation will swing back the other way, which might go a little bit beyond where it should be going, and maybe makes it even more difficult for the accredited investors who've helped to build many, many successful companies.
This happens to be what my partner and I in building Angelus view as our primary risk factor for our business. We think it's almost inevitable that there will be some fraud that happens in the market with these new regulations, that will result in our government changing regulations again to try and address that fraud. And as we've seen happen so many times, the government's not especially good at getting exactly the impact that they intended to get when they write their regulations. So we could find ourselves building a business that then gets regulated out of existence if we get, all of the rules that are being changed now just get wiped away. So we think that what we have to do is prove it is possible to do this kind of financing. We're not talking about doing the crowd financing that we've spent a lot of time talking about, but rather just the 506 deals. But we have to prove it's possible to do that without fraud, keeping safety for the investors in a way that we can then credibly go to the regulators as they're putting new regulations into place and say, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There is a model that has been proven to work.
Oh my God, you're assuming rational legislators.
I'm assuming a chance to talk.
So, why don't you go ahead, and then if you have some questions, why don't you get ready to ask some questions? Maybe we can try to answer some specific questions for you.
So we touched on, I just want to make one point that we touched on that I think is really of global importance, and that is where we really talked about knowing who your investors are. And so amongst professional investors, I want to know who my co-investors are in the deal. Carol and I are in deals together. And I'd really like to vet, who the co-investors are, and I have battle scars from bad co-investors. And along those same lines is that you as entrepreneurs, also a huge part of bringing in investors are people that you can really resonate with, and because it's going to be a long-term marriage, and so it's really important not only the dollars, it's the quality of the dollars and the quality of the mentorship and the things that Carol talked about that come along with it. So it's really important to have a good match there.
Good comments, thank you. So, I'm sorry this mic is dead, but if you have questions, we'd love to hear them. Anybody in the back? Just yell it out so we can all hear. You ma'am. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Great. So I'm listening closely to all of the aspects that I need to consider as an entrepreneur when I'm looking for funding. And I'm also following the breakdown of what you said we would come here and learn. So I'm clear that we're covering the legal and regulatory landscape of crowdfunding and or angel investing. But the pieces I'm not clear about are the things in terms of, can you cover, creating a compelling website or message so we can attract crowdfunding, how to attract certain kinds of angel investors. So those are the things I'm wanting to get from you that I'm not quite hearing. I'm hearing the concerns. Excuse me?
Which one do you want the most?
I want both of them. So however you all want to answer that, but all I'm saying is I appreciate hearing the concerns and what could happen. I also want to hear what are some solutions, and I do appreciate your comment about how to transition from crowdfunding into attracting venture capital money if at all possible, and what are some solutions we can employ. As you all know, you got to make it however you can out here, so there's no quick, easy fix, and I understand that as entrepreneurs we also have to be creative. So if you can address that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So I don't think you want any of us designing a website. I'm gonna just take that one off the thing. I mean, if you see mine sucks. But so what I will say is, if you're here in Silicon Valley, the first decision that you have to make is, do you want outside money at all? I mean, regardless of if it's friends and family or if it's angel investors or VCs. And one of the unknown or undiscussed issues about Silicon Valley is that we still have a very large population of self-funded startups. And I mean, that's how I did my business. Most of my partners did it that way, not all, most of them. And it's a totally acceptable way. And I'll be the first to tell you, as Don mentioned, when you take somebody else's money, you have just formed a relationship that is going to be in place until that money comes back. And that can be a joy in your life if you pick the right investor. And it can be an absolute, oh my God, gotta deal with them, kind of, weight around your neck and literally preventing you from doing and being what you want to be. So the first question is always, do you really want to take somebody else's money? Because you're going to lose a lot of freedom, and you're going to have to deal with these people over a long period of time. Assuming that you do, the Valley is actually very clear about the process. You've got to get what I call a champion angel involved, which is somebody who has a track record amongst us, who can work with you and teach you what you need to be able to do to be able to be attractive to us. And then when they feel that you're ready, they will make an introduction. And they typically actually won't make it to one of us. They'll make it to an interim step, and that interim step will introduce up through the channel. The other most likely way to get an introduction is, how many of you have a lawyer from Silicon Valley? Okay. Your lawyer in Silicon Valley is a fabulous source of introduction to all of us. I always take the phone calls and the emails from the law firm where the individual lawyer has sent me an individual message saying, please take a look at this. And if you're not using your law firm to be your introduction resource, then you're not using the full benefit of having a lawyer.
Great point.
Go ahead. We should probably take some more questions.
Let me address one thing. I'm sorry.
One thing,
you don't want me to do your website any more than you want any of us to do your website. But part of your question was, how do I attract angel investors? And that deserves a good, strong, thoughtful answer. And the answer is, you have to know inside and out what is the value that you are going to create inside your business. Because that's really what you're offering to investors. You have to know what problem is out there that you're going to solve. What are alternative solutions that will solve that problem without you? How are you going to be a better solution than any of those other problems? How are you then going to turn that solution into some cash flow that builds value in your company? Because that's ultimately how an investor that puts money in will get the money back out. Now, I think most angel investors won't invest purely on a financial basis. That no matter how good the dollars in versus dollars out they can expect, if they don't think that there's something that makes them feel good about this company or about the people that they're going to work with, they won't do it. But you have to have that financing there to make sense to them from a dollars and cents point of view.
I don't know, we find dollars and cents pretty attractive.
I fully agree with that statement. You actually focus on the angels. Exactly the same applies to the VCs, or at least ourselves. And I want to take it just one little step further. You only have a few minutes to explain to a potential investor what's the problem you're trying to solve, what's the unique way you would resolve it. But then the biggest thing is, why would customers want to pay you a ton of money to get their hands on that solution? And if you cannot convince me within 10 minutes that you have come up with something really, really unique, you have a terrible uphill battle to convince us afterwards. If you don't get that message across within 10 minutes, it's probably a lost opportunity.
I'll get a question, just to build on it slightly, is that here in Silicon Valley, a common weakness in startup companies that come in is that real understanding of the customer problem, and the marketing and sales background. There's really a lot of brilliant technical solutions, but that marketing and sales side of it and that understanding of the customer that's really key, and that's often what will set a company apart.
I just, it's almost a comment, but when I got the email about the crowdfunding thing, I wasn't all that interested in that. I was much more interested in the angel. And I've spent, 3.5 hours here. Pretty much, I think what I heard is that crowdfunding is like ridiculously, and I think it's unanimous that everybody thinks it's the worst thing in the world to do, is what I'm hearing. And maybe I heard that wrong.
No, we're saying for traditional Silicon Valley businesses,
That's exactly the point. I don't think we want to say it's a bad thing. What we want to say is, if you only have a hammer and a nail and you treat everything as a nail because all you have hold in your hand is a hammer, you have a problem. So crowdfunding can work in certain situations. Many of those situations are probably not the traditional types of deals we've done over the last decades.
I did want to say that her question was fantastic, and you guys answered it really, really well. And it's worth the wait through all the crowdfunding is really ridiculous comments, but thank you very much.
Sure.
So I'll start with a mini comment, which is that as an entrepreneur, and I've done now multiple venture rounds, I don't see crowdfunding anymore as equity at all. It's completely shifted in the last year. It used to be this equity issue, but Kickstarter, they all consider themselves crowdfunding sources, and they're all reward-based. So a little bit to your answer, there is no equity issue. If you think of crowdfunding as you're basically pre-selling, it's essentially a new mechanism for selling a product. That's all it really is. It's a different mechanism. So one of the questions there would be, so just somebody in the trenches, that's what crowdfunding is to me now. It has nothing to do with equity, nothing whatsoever.
but I don't think that's what it's going to be tomorrow.
Fair enough, but we don't know when that's going to change, and we don't know what that law is going to be. And in the meantime, they have very successfully co-opted the language. So I really believe that when it becomes equity, it will be called something else. It won't be called crowdfunding. It will be called something else. because it will already be owned by those market leaders. But the question is,
Yeah.
with that form of crowdfunding, meaning reward-based funding, do you have an awareness of what kinds of projects are most successfully funded at the highest levels and why?
So I've done some looking into that, and probably and a lot of the crowdfunding platform, the rewards-based crowdfunding platforms are having some difficulties with having enough flow go through so that they're getting enough fees for their financial model. So certainly the Kickstarter is the best known, perhaps the most successful one amongst the field. And if you look at it, and actually it's worth spending some time there, because if you dig down and dig through the layers of their website, they actually have a lot of data. And some of the data, isn't so encouraging in terms of amounts of money. Like the average amount is, I believe, is $71. And also they have 13 categories, and they have the top 3 deals in each one of the categories. And if you notice, the big successes are computer games, some real kind of consumer type items like that. And so if you have an item that really fits there, that could be quite good. Once you get out of those like really top categories, their best deals are, $100,000 total raise. I think it's, I think something like 70-some or 80-some% is 135,000 less across all their deals or all 13 categories.